Good morning, folks. Welcome back to the Food for the Faithful channel with me, Bill Reimer, your reluctant prophet. I've been writing this one for some time, watching all hell break loose back in Great Britain. And very often I hear people talking about what the problems are without ever analyzing what the root cause is. Since I taught total quality and root causality has everything to do with problem solving, if we intend to solve this societal crisis, the West is in collapse because we have torn down the foundations upon which it is built. So, from here in Gracefield on this windy, blustery day with rain, here in the brand new Ventures Stratus, I decided to complete this blog and vodcast. It's a deep topic. Some of you may not be interested, even though you ought to be, because these are the problems that this generation must solve if we're to leave anything for the future of our, well, in my case, grandchildren and great-grandchildren. So I'm going to begin by discussing how Gnosticism posed an inherent threat to the early church, whose task it became to counter false doctrines. This is essential for Christianity today, since we are facing a similar crisis with Gnostic postmodern woke ideologies. The following reasons define how Gnosticism posed a significant threat to the early Christian church. Theological differences. Gnosticism introduced beliefs that were fundamentally different from Orthodox Christian teachings. Gnostics believed in a dualistic universe where the material world was created by a lesser, malevolent deity, and salvation was achieved through secret knowledge, gnosis. This contrasted sharply with the Christian belief in a single benevolent God and salvation through faith in Christ. Scriptural interpretations. Gnostics often had their own interpretations of Christian scriptures or even their own texts, such as the Gospel of Thomas. These interpretations and texts sometimes contradicted the canonical Gospels and teachings of the early church, leading to confusion and division among believers, which is why today we see many of churches infected by woke ideology. Authority and unity. The early church was working to establish a unified doctrine and authority structure. Gnosticism, with its diverse and often secretive teachings, undermined this effort by promoting alternative leaders and doctrines. This threatened the unity and cohesion of the early Christian community. Ethical implications. Some Gnostic teachings led to ethical practices that were at odds with those of the early church. For example, some Gnostics believed that since the material world was evil, moral behavior in the physical realm was irrelevant, which is why, of course, we're seeing transsexual behavior and gay marriages being sanctioned by the church. This could lead to either extreme asceticism or moral laxity, both of which were problematic for the early church's emphasis on righteous living. Overall, Gnosticism challenged the early church's efforts to define and defend its core beliefs, maintain unity, and establish a consistent ethical framework. The church responded by condemning Gnostic teachings as heretical and working to clarify and codify Orthodox Christian doctrine. So let me be clear. Postmodern woke beliefs and cultural Marxist critical theory are heresies. It's that important to understand. That's why They're serving to deconstruct everything that we recognize as being normal, and that this new level of acceptance of perversion is labeled the new normal. So in today's blog and vodcast, I will attempt to demonstrate why the current attack on our cultural values is due to Gnosticism, due to the Gnosticism inherent to authoritarianism in all its various socially collectivist forms. It always takes on a form of social collectivism. It has to, because it must force everybody to march in unthinking lockstep. These manifestations of illiberalism are in fact expressions of Gnostic mystery religions where only its priests can truly understand its hidden mysteries. This obviously seems to fly in the face of the fact that they deny the existence of God, but only because we fail to recognize that its priests have made themselves into gods. This is why, when we have heard them speak or read what they have written, one is forced to wonder why their rhetoric often sounds like gobbledygook. A musician friend of mine sent me an article written in one of the Fourth Estate's most notable neo-Marxist rags that promoted an end to the use of coal as an energy source. And the article asked Trudeau to interfere with shipping it abroad. I told my friend that I literally never read the Toronto Star. I have no use for the Fourth Estate, which has become the disinformation arm of a government, or better put, taxpayer-funded cultural revolution. I said to him, I do not think you are fully aware of how completely I have rejected the accepted postmodern narrative. In the first grade, when they made us sing, I am a little teapot, short and stout, I balked at it. I knew I was short, but certainly not stout. I am today, however. Moreover, I knew I was not a teapot, and was horrified at how the entire class, most emphatically the little girls, went along with its idiotic gestures of the hip hold, extended arm, and tipping whilst singing its moronic, ever so uncool, white and ungroovy lyrics. I do not do things in unison with others. I cannot march in lockstep with the current mandated thing. We now live in a society which blindly follows leaders who are marching us straight into a cultural abattoir, which is why 3 little girls were hacked to death at a Taylor Swift dance class in the north of Great Britain, north of England rather. And for the fools who do not want coal to be used, the solution to using it cleanly is to install scrubbers in the chimneys of the plants who burn it. It is impossible to turn matter into energy without creating byproducts. I guess you idiots who danced the teapot passed that course with flying colors, but flunked high school physics. Why there is broad acceptance of the postmodern narrative, despite it sounding like nonsense. For at least 60 years, dialectics have crept their way into the prevailing postmodern narrative. In rejecting God, its creators have founded a new Hegelian mystery religion, where only its priests can see behind the curtain of Gnostic knowledge, which is why to the uninitiated it appears to be based upon madness. It's an ideology that can't tell the difference between a man and a woman. Believe it or not, this explains the reason for the deliberate outcome of what the postmodern priests label as progress being madness, because we lack the secret knowledge to understand what the word progress means. Every single totalitarian ideology has been based on Hegelian dialectical thinking. Its influence on the postmodern narrative is among the best documented phenomena of our time. It borrows from the Platonic idea of the demiurge, The concept of the demiurge, as originally presented by Plato and later adopted by various philosophical and religious traditions, has not been explicitly adopted by totalitarian regimes, but its concepts have been borrowed and altered to suit their purposes. The demiurge is primarily a metaphysical and cosmological figure, and its interpretations have largely remained within the realms of philosophy, theology, and esoteric traditions. However, totalitarian ideologies have drawn on various philosophical and religious concepts to justify their worldviews and actions. For example, certain Gnostic interpretations of the demiurge depicted as a malevolent or ignorant creator, responsible for the flawed material world. This is the essence of both Nazism's and communism's worldview, that it is up to them to change the nature of reality itself, because they cannot accept the world the way it is. This idea of a corrupt and oppressive creator could be metaphorically linked to the way totalitarian regimes view themselves as the ultimate authority, shaping and controlling society according to their own ideals. All the links for the research for that posted below this section. If you're listening to the vodcast, there will be a link to the blog in the YouTube video. Go to that link. You can read these things for yourself and do your own research. I always encourage you. You don't believe me. Look the facts up for yourself and look where I've drawn the research for this blog and vodcast from. Totalitarian ideologies often draw on various philosophical and religious concepts to justify their control over society. While the concept of the demiurge itself hasn't been directly adopted by totalitarian regimes, its underlying themes can be seen in how these ideologies operate in the following ways. Control and order. The demiurge in Gnostic traditions is often seen as a controlling force shaping the material world. Similarly, totalitarian regimes seek to control all aspects of life, imposing strict order and suppressing dissent, which is why you're hearing the Prime Minister of Great Britain making all sorts of authoritarian pronouncements about ending freedom of discourse. Kill the market of free ideas, and you're going to kill the very foundations for parliamentary discourse. But he's doing it. He's a lawyer. It's what lawyers are good at. You don't go to court to get justice. You go to get a judgment. And these judgments are being made by a fool who's filled with Gnostic mystery ideas that only, well, high priests like himself can understand. Creation of a new reality. Just as the demiurge is seen as creating the physical world, totalitarian regimes often aim to create a new social and political reality. They use propaganda, censorship, and education to shape the beliefs and behaviors of their citizens, like that article from the Toronto Star, for instance. Utopian ideals. Totalitarian ideologies often promise a utopian future, much like the demiurge's creation of an ordered cosmos from chaos. This promise is used to justify extreme measures and the suppression of individual freedoms. So they've replaced heaven with a utopia that cannot exist, for that's literally the Greek meaning of utopia, which means no place. Centralized authority. The demiurge is a central authoritative figure in the creation myth. Totalitarian regimes similarly centralize power in a single leader or party, demanding absolute loyalty and obedience. Remember what Trudeau did when he evoked the Emergency Measures Act? He was demanding absolute obedience to protocols that were scientifically proven to be ineffective, while forcing people to take an inoculant that has caused hundreds of thousands of people to become ill, that did not fulfill the purpose that he swore it would fulfill, namely prevent the spread of the virus. All the links for that section underneath it as well. While totalitarian ideologies don't explicitly reference the demiurge, they often adopt a role that mirrors its attributes, especially within the Gnostic framework. Here's how. Perception of a flawed world. Totalitarian regimes typically view the existing social, political, and economic order as fundamentally flawed, corrupt, or oppressive. That's why you constantly hear systemic racism. English common law demands that all be treated equally under it. And yet here they say that there is systemic oppression which, following the law itself, would prevent. But they can't explain that mystery as to why they refuse to enforce the rule of law. This perspective aligns with a Gnostic view of the material world being inherently defective due to the demiurge's influence. Promise of radical transformation. Now remember this because we'll cross-reference this back later in the vodcast. To address these perceived flaws, totalitarian movements propose a comprehensive reorganization of society. They aim to craft a new world order based on their ideological principles, essentially acting as creators or architects of a redesigned reality. This ambition parallels the demiurge's role as a shaper of the material world. Claim to exclusive knowledge. Scholars like Eric Vogelin have described modern totalitarian movements as exhibiting Gnostic characteristics. These ideologies often claim to possess exclusive rights or knowledge, gnosis, about the path to a perfected society. This self-ascribed authority justifies their sweeping reforms and the suppression of dissenting views, as they label us as deplorables or people with unacceptable views or knuckle-dragging Cro-Magnons, whatever. Immanentizing the eschaton. The totalitarian regimes attempt to realize an ultimate, often utopian, state of society within the temporal world, a concept Vogelin termed immanentizing the eschaton. This endeavor reflects the demiurge's act of bringing form and order to existence, albeit through a flawed lens. In essence, while the totalitarian ideologies don't directly adopt the idea of the demiurge, they embody its thematic elements by positioning themselves as the sole architects capable of redeeming a flawed world, a world that was redeemed when Christ died on the cross. And that redemption can be found by anyone who places their faith in him and confesses Christ as their Lord. In essence, while totalitarian ideologies don't directly adopt the idea of the demiurge, they embody its thematic elements by positioning themselves as sole architects of the flawed world. This alignment serves to both legitimize their authority and to mobilize support for their transformative agendas. Now that's what appears to be amazing to me, because people are required to believe in nonsense to march in lockstep with them. Nonsense that contradicts itself. The high priests of the global cabal are behind this. For the first time in human history, global illiberal and authoritarian interests have coalesced into an all-powerful and controlling system where NGOs, non-governmental organizations, and quangos are dictating to sovereign nations how their citizens must be governed. These entities are responsible for the mishandling of COVID-19 and the lies we were told about the toxic, failed inoculant that was created in concert with the virus, which resulted in untold injuries to those who have received it. These same NGOs and quangos all use variations of cultural Marxist critical theory to further a cultural revolution which starts with redefining the nature of the nuclear family. Their agenda has successfully broken down the very structures of and foundations for civil society, which is why we are currently experiencing such unprecedented levels of civil unrest due to them pursuing a neo-Marxist utopia which cannot exist. Multiculturalism is therefore an impossibility, since it denies the very nature of the social glue that makes culture itself possible, namely shared ethical values, cultural traditions, and common religious beliefs. The West cannot exist as a project that defends human dignity and freedom without its Christian foundations, which is why Christianity exists in direct opposition to the goals of these organizations, which are creations of the UN. The UN, instead of being a vehicle for international peace and cooperation, has become the means for furthering neo-Marxism. All the sources, or rather, now I begin by quoting from an article that I'm about to read. The link to that article I have listed. Non-governmental organizations, NGOs, serve as critical players in the modern social framework, often filling gaps that government bodies and private sectors are unable to address effectively. The role of an NGO in society encompasses a wide range of activities that contribute to social change, community development, and the promotion of civic engagement. Isn't it incredible to note that while they make these claims, they've resulted in the diametric opposite? In this article, we will explore the multifaceted functions that NGOs perform and how to find NGOs in your area in case you want to, join the church lady and march in lockstep with Beelzebub and do the I'm so righteous dance. What is an NGO? Non-governmental organizations, or NGOs, were first called such in Article 71 in the Charter of the newly formed United Nations in 1945. While NGOs have no fixed or formal definition, they are generally defined as non-profit entities independent of governmental influence, meaning independent of democracy, independent of legislative bodies, although they may receive government funding. As one can tell from the basic definition above, the difference between non-profit organizations, NPOs, and NGOs is slim. However, the term NGO is not typically applied to US-based non-profit organizations. Generally, the NGO label is given to organizations operating on an international level. Remember I said this is the new global cabal. They operate on an international level, and they all share the same Gnostic mystery beliefs. Although some countries classify their own civil society groups as NGOs. One of the primary roles of an NGO is to advocate for social change. There we go. This process of transformation, this utopia that it pursues, when we're seeing unprecedented levels of civil unrest. Children being knifed in broad daylight. NGOs often work towards influencing policies and legislation that affects the communities they serve. By engaging in advocacy work, NGOs raise awareness on critical issues such as human rights, environmental protection, and social justice, striving to bring about systemic change that can improve the lives of people on a larger scale. Where's the proof? They're having the diametric opposite effect. I'm an old man in the 72nd year of my life, and I've seen unprecedented breakdown in social glue, and increased lawlessness, and increased poverty. Food banks are being used in Canada at unprecedented levels, not by the homeless, not by the dispossessed, but by the working poor. Grassroots mobilization. NGOs play a crucial role in mobilizing communities at the grassroots level. So where are these organizations, like Black Lives Matter and all these other groups that are fomenting civil unrest? They're being funded by them. They empower individuals by providing them with the knowledge and tools to advocate for their rights and interests. This bottom-up approach ensures that the voices of the marginalized and underrepresented are heard, fostering a society that values inclusivity and diversity. First of all, they're taking their orders from on high. And I've seen a breakdown since people are now being, what we're seeing is a resurrection of prejudice. What we were after before was a colorblind society where everybody would be judged by the nature of their character, and now we see nothing but color, nothing but race, nothing but creed, all the things actually that English common law forbids. Lady Justice must be blind. Humanitarian assistance. In times of crisis such as natural disasters or conflicts, NGOs are often among the first to respond with humanitarian assistance. They provide essential services including food, shelter, medical care, and psychological support to those affected. And yet we see in the Middle East, in the conflict going on between Israel and the Palestinians, people starving in Palestine on unprecedented levels. NGOs' flexibility and ability to act quickly often make them more efficient than larger, more bureaucratic institutions in delivering aid to those in need. There could be nothing more bureaucratic than an NGO. They're literally run by bureaucrats. We're looking at the metastasizing of bureaucracy under neo-Marxism. Community development and empowerment. NGOs are instrumental in community development projects that aim to improve the quality of life for individuals and groups. Then why are more people homeless than ever before? These projects also include building schools, improving healthcare facilities, which are collapsing around us, improving vocational training to enhance employment, which the only employment that's increased in Canada is a bureaucracy. The private sector is dying under the policies of this neo-Marxist regime run by Trudeau and Jagmeet Singh. By focusing on empowerment, NGOs help communities to become self-reliant and sustainable. They're not self-reliant at all. They're reliant on Big Brother. Sustainable development goals. This is the real one that if something was sustainable, you wouldn't even need to talk about it because it'd be sustained. What they're doing is they're giving artificial respiration to a dying corpse. That's what they mean by sustainable. By killing everything that has worked and by propagating miracle technologies that don't. We don't have the electrical grid to build electric vehicles and charge them. And do we see an expansion in the electrical grid? No. We see the government subsidizing the building of electric vehicles that don't work in Canadian winters. NGOs often these 17, wait a minute, let's get back to this one. NGOs contribute significantly to the achievement of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. These 17 goals aim to address global challenges such as poverty, inequality, climate change, and peace. NGOs often tailor their projects and initiatives to align with one or more of these goals, thereby contributing to a global effort towards sustainable development. But it isn't happening. Because they focus on all the wrong things. If they really cared about the marginalized and the dispossessed, the number one thing that could lift them out of poverty would give them ready access to clean fuel. Instead of preventing people from using the sources of energy we already have and to utilize them effectively and environmentally consciously, they're preventing them from using them at all. And so they're keeping people in poverty. Just to further the utopia that can't exist. Education and capacity building. Education is a cornerstone of NGO activities. I think they mean indoctrination. Many organizations focus on providing educational opportunities to children and adults alike to help reduce illiteracy rates and equipping individuals with the skills needed to participate fully in society. Through capacity building workshops, NGOs also strengthen the abilities of other civil society organizations, enhancing their impact and efficiency. Notice all of this is framed in flowery language, despite the fact that the results are the diametric opposite of what was promised. How can I find an NGO in my area? Navigating the vast landscape of non-governmental organizations can be a daunting task. Enter Candid, that's the name of the program, the world's largest source of comprehensive information on NGOs. Whether you're a philanthropist, a researcher, or simply interested in the nonprofit sector, Candid is your first stop to accessing NGOs in your area. Now I'm going to get to my summating thoughts. The hive mind shared by these organizations represent a set of orthodoxies that demand compliance to their doctrines under pain of being labeled a heretic. These bodies have replaced every legislative assembly throughout the developed West under their direct influence, and woe betide any sovereign nation who dare to govern itself under its own laws, particularly if those laws are founded on Christian ethics and biblical morality. The very reason that the average person cannot comprehend their agenda is that its Gnostic secrets are known only to its high priests. Those who long to share in such mysteries are only permitted to enter behind the veil of secrecy by means of blind obedience. To the sane mind, this enigma is hidden in cognitive dissonance if one were to attempt to accept the mutually exclusive nonsense of Hegelian anti-reason of thesis, then antithesis onto synthesis. Here's how that works. Thesis, 2 plus 2 equals 4. Antithesis, 2 plus 2 equals 5. Synthesis, 2 plus 2 equals 4 and or 5, depending on the whims of the high priests. This is how willing the priests of this Gnostic cult have become to accept something which the average person simply cannot grasp. And this universalism has replaced Christianity. It has become the Gnostic cult of our time. You may think this is a good thing, but you would be a fool if you do, since every single authoritarian regime was based upon Gnostic mysticism and Hegelian thinking. So let's examine how the early church took measures to counter the threat of Gnosticism and other false ideologies. Establish canonical scriptures. The church worked to establish a canon of authoritative scriptures by recognizing certain texts as inspired and authoritative. The church provided a clear standard for doctrine and practice. This helped to counter the diverse and often contradictory texts promoted by Gnostic groups. Creeds and confessions. The early church formulated creeds and confessions of faith, such as the Apostles' Creed and the Nicene Creed. These concise statements of core Christian beliefs helped to unify the church around a common set of doctrines and provided a clear standard against which to measure other teachings. Church councils. The church convened councils, such as the Council of Nicaea in 324 AD, to address theological disputes and heresies. These councils brought together bishops and other church leaders to discuss and resolve issues, leading to the formal condemnation of Gnostic teachings and the affirmation of orthodox Christian doctrine. 4. Apologetics and theological writings. Early Christian apologists and theologians, such as Irenaeus, Tertullian and Origen wrote exclusively to refute Gnostic teaching and defend Christianity. Their writings provided intellectual and theological arguments against Gnosticism and helped to educate and strengthen the faith of believers. Pastoral care and discipleship. Church leaders emphasized pastoral care and discipleship to ensure that believers were well grounded in their faith. We need churches today that will give you the meat of the word and not feed Christians pablum. It's time that we grow up to the full measure of the stature of a man, created in the image of Christ, crucified with him, and resurrected and seated with him at the right hand of God the Father, possessed with all authority and all power to put Satan beneath our feet. He may bruise our heel, we will crush his head. And the scriptures promise this. By teaching sound doctrine and providing spiritual guidance, pastors and bishops help to protect their congregations from the influence of false teachings. Through these efforts, the early church was able to counter the threat of Gnosticism and other false ideologies, maintaining the integrity and unity of the Christian faith. If we are to have any hope at all of restoring godly order and the freedom which is to be found in Christ alone, we must do the same. This is a call to action to all who share my hope in a living and resurrected Savior. For without Christ as King of every earthly government, we are doomed to live in oppressive, murderous tyranny, despite all the idiotic utopian promises of the Gnostic fools who are busy deconstructing what has taken 2 millennia to build. God bless you all. These are words to think and pray about. Again, look at the sources for my research. God bless you. And please leave comments and criticisms. And with that, I'll bid you all a blessed Monday afternoon.